So former Miami Marlins president David Sampson spoke on the business dealings with Alex Rodriguez, as previously he tried to purchase the Marlins, but to no avail, didn't have enough money. He gave some great insights as it pertains to this situation, and he wasn't surprised that this really didn't work out. You guys check it out, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
So let's take people back before he was having illegal practices in Minnesota, before he bought a house and pretended he was from Minnesota. He agreed to buy the Timberwolves at a price of $1.5 billion in 2021. But it was something called a step transaction. A step transaction means you lock in the value today, but you pay over time. And there are deadlines contained within the purchase agreement that you have to make your next installment payment by a certain day. And Arod has missed just about every deadline. And Glen Taylor has been okay. He said, hey, we'll extend the deadline. Don't worry about it. But meanwhile, the price of basketball teams have skyrocketed since 2021. So the Timberwolves are no longer worth 1.5. Let's say they're worth about 2.5. So that means that Glen Taylor feels terribly that he sold the team at 1.5 when he could have sold it at 2.5. But he was in a contract, nothing he could do until Arod missed another deadline. And there were rumors that the Carlyle Group pulled out. And then 10 minutes later, Arod had another deal with another private equity company. And it was all horse hockey. Arod has never been able to come up with the money to finish this transaction. So today, Glen Taylor said, Ganug, guess what, Alex? The team's not for sale anymore. You violated the contract. What he also said in the release is, hey, if they want to come back and talk, we can keep talking about selling the team. But guess what? An official wait to see here on Le Batard Show, courtesy of Nothing Personal. If the team is sold again by Glen Taylor to Arod, it won't be for 1.5. Because I've been calling this for 2 years. Because I negotiated with Arod to buy the Marlins, and he had everything except the money. And so it was always going to be an issue, and he wants to be an owner so badly that he pretended he wanted to be in Minnesota, but he never was able to hit a deadline. And finally, Glen Taylor said, you know what? It's cool that you're Arod, but money's way more important.
What was Marc Lore's role, if not to be the money?
Marc Lore was brought in to be a percentage of the money, but he had given his allocation at the first go-around. So he was never going to be part of the increased finishing the installments. It always had to be OPM, other people's money. And Arod's been out raising money for years and just has been unable to do it. And here's why. Arod could have borrowed money and gotten investors at the $1.5 billion number. But Arod always was trying to make a Beckham-like profit like Beckham did in Inter Miami. He was selling pieces of the team at numbers higher than 1.5. And people were like, hey, why do you get this incredible benefit of having such a low basis? And now it's all done.
Arod was never going to get that type of leveraging power that Beckham got here in the States. Beckham was the face of soccer here in the States at some point, trying to elevate the sport. And the initial buy-in for MLS teams were at a low enough price for guys to make a profit. NBA teams, ever since Arod struck this deal in 2021, prices just keep going higher and higher. The owners who came in and made those purchases locked up those teams within a 60-day window. That's pretty much been the trend. And the teams that were purchased, those for way more than 1.5 billion. I mean, the Suns were purchased for 4, the Milwaukee Bucks were purchased for 3. Same thing for the Dallas Mavericks. So Arod right here looks like the odd man out. But David Sampson further elaborates on how Arod and his business partner are now minority owners. And again, like I said before, Glen Taylor, he's good at flipping shit with the spatula, because this deal took a complete 180 and now he's highly favored.
He is a minority owner. There's two ways it can go. They can, and you have to look at the contract. So contracts can have two different provisions. One can be that if any installment payment is not made, then the entire contract is void and the money gets returned to the investor, in this case, Arod. It can be returned with a premium. They can maybe go to appraisal if the team is worth more since the first sale. So Glen Taylor has to give Arod a little bit more for his money to get that money back. or it can be that Arod stays as a limited partner with the percentage he already owned because he made those first installments. So I don't know what the contract says, but it's one of those two things.
So it wouldn't be a bad deal if they got their money back. They would get it at the inflation price that happened in between 2021 to 2024. But what there's a yin, there's a yang. If the Minnesota Timberwolves next season, especially with Karl Anthony Towns' contract, go over the luxury tax threshold and any team net losses or just any penalties occur, Arod and his business partner will be on the hook for those liabilities according to the percentage of the team that they own. Now, as these teams' evaluations keep climbing higher and higher, at some point, there's not going to be enough people to come in and close out these purchases within a 60 to 90 day window. So this is where the NBA finds itself in a conundrum, because at some point they're going to want to welcome in private equity funds or just hedge funds to come in and buy up these teams so the evaluations could continue climbing up higher and higher. But David Samson gives us some insight on how it normally works when owners come in who have enough equity to close out these deals.
Well, listen, the number one straightforward of all time was Steve Ballmer.
Yeah, cash.
He went to the ATM, took out a couple bill. Sterling was gone. Ballmer was in. It was a dream come true for Adam Silver. But the number of people in the world who can do transactions like that is very, very small. So when the value of the assets of these teams continues to increase, you need groups of people. Like Bruce Sherman has a group of 10 or 20 people helping him do the Marlins transaction. When you look at what David Rubenstein just did with the Orioles, they listed all of the limited partners. You're putting together 20 million pieces of 20 million each. You need a lot of money, which is why the NFL is looking into allowing sovereign fund money, and basketball and baseball already do allow it because you want to keep the value of teams increasing. To do that, you have to find big chunks of change from people who don't want control. And in the real world, an individual doesn't want to give you $300 million toward the purchase of a team and not be allowed in the clubhouse, or not be allowed in an owner's meeting, or not be allowed to make a trade.
That's exactly the position Alex Rodriguez and Marc Lore find themselves in right now. And this is all after they already gave $600 million.
It's super hard to put these deals together now. I think you have to look to see who the governor is with Cuban and the Mavericks, and I'll bet you $1 the governor is not Mark Cuban anymore. It is the son of, I think her name was Miriam Edelson. Mm-hmm. So what's interesting, George Steinbrenner once said something to me, because what he said was important, and for him to say it, there's nothing more limiting than being my limited partner.
But with Arod, it seems like he had issues finding a private equity group that the league would approve. As right here, we're going to get some insight to some of the reasoning of why the initial private equity group who pledged $300 million was rejected, or allegedly was, because eventually, come to find out, there are rumors going around that this group actually pulled out of the deal.
Now, David, one of the things you mentioned, the Carlyle Group earlier, that was the original team the original firm that Arod had secured financing through. Axios had come out with a report saying that they were out because some of the stuff in their portfolio ran afoul of the NBA guidelines, bylines, whatever, right? There's another report that came out and said, no, they weren't denied, they pulled out. Either way, I don't care what the truth is. I just do want to know, for a sports league, a major league sports, like MLB, like the NBA, what would be the type of things that would be in these rules and guidelines where someone else's portfolio would run afoul of?
Well, funny, it used to be gambling. That was the big thing that they looked for, that if anyone was associated with any sort of casino or gambling, they were not eligible to be a limited partner. There is tremendous background checks that go in when you become a limited partner in baseball. There is full background, full check on who you are, who you're associated with. You've got to pass through the ownership committee, the executive council, then the full vote of the owners in Major League Baseball, to say nothing of the commissioner's office. So they're looking for any dealings, but let's be honest, Steve Cohen's background wasn't exactly perfect. He had been in the middle of some major suits, some major workplace issues, some major SEC violations. And guess what? If the price is right, Bob Barker, we're going to find a way to approve you. And so I believe that Carlyle pulled out And it's not that the NBA turned them down, because these leagues know now that when you find chunks of change, you really need to take it, because the commissioner, who wants his job and wants to keep his job, wants to keep the value of the teams going up. And to do that, you need lots of people with lots of money.
And speaking of the commissioner, Adam Silver was asked about whether the league had jurisdictions to intervene in this whole situation.
Where do things stand with the situation with the sale of the Timberwolves? And at what point would the league get involved with that?
It's not clear whether there will be a role for the league to get involved. Where it stands is Glen Taylor on one hand as the seller of the franchise, and then with Marc Lore and Alex Rodriguez as the buyers, they have a purchase agreement. And there's a dispute now in the purchase agreement. And in their purchase agreement, they in essence pre-agreed to a dispute resolution mechanism that includes mediation and arbitration. And that's where it stands. There is no role for the league in that process.
AKA Adam Silver works for Glen Taylor, and this scenario is actually going to play out according to the contract. And if I was a betting man, I would say Glen Taylor is going to come out on top. But Adam Silver was also asked about the claims that Arod and Marc Lore made about the NBA's pending approval would trigger an extra 90-day extension into that contract.
Two quick Timberwolves questions. One, Alex and Marc have said that the only thing holding up their deal was NBA approval of the financing and the money. Can you clarify or confirm exactly where that stood when Glen announced that the deal, in his view, was off?
I can't say more other than that comment is at the heart of their dispute. And again, the dispute is precisely that, as to whether they had acted within the window of the option that Glen Taylor had sold them. I mean, that's the very basis of the dispute, and so that dispute will be resolved independent of the league office.
Got it. And then secondly, this was an atypical deal from the outset. They had not raised the money. Glen wanted 3 years path to control. Is this a deal structure the NBA would approve in the future, or does this necessitate a rethink about what types of structures allow you to buy NBA teams moving forward?
That's an important question. I think this deal happened in the early days of the pandemic, when it was extraordinary circumstances.
And keep in mind, the league did borrow over $800 million during the pandemic to keep some of the teams afloat. They were able to secure a low interest rate from one of it's either advertising partner. They didn't really elaborate on who it was, but it's already a company that works with the NBA. And at the same time, they're very institutional. They're accredited investors. So the NBA got some help staying afloat. Things were iffy during the pandemic because a lot of teams were already losing money before then, like the Detroit Pistons. But now with the rate of inflation going up the way it has, a lot of the assets have gone up in value, particularly sports leagues, as well as the franchises. And the impact has been so great that it has even had a trickle-down effect. We see leagues like the WNBA and the MLS have gone way up in value.
For everyone in our community, I think lessons learned too, that as new situations evolve in the league as to what kind of transactions make sense. I think let's wait to see how this one works out. But it's certainly not ideal to have a stepped transaction like this. I mean, it met our rules from that standpoint. But and it's what Glen Taylor wanted, and it's what they were willing to agree to at the time. But I think once the dust clears, on this deal, it may cause us to reassess what sort of transactions we should allow.
So there you have it. $1 today isn't $1 tomorrow. And a situation like this normally would play out behind the scenes, but we're getting a peek of some of the battles that goes on with the different tiers of billionaires, quote unquote. And from the outside looking in, it looks like the old timer of Glen Taylor at the age of 82 is not going to allow himself to get finessed by two multi-millionaires whose net worths definitely got a boost through startup evaluations. But at the end of the day, is only a fraction in comparison to someone who has tangible assets not only throughout the world, and also has an employee base outside of the Minnesota Timberwolves of 10,000 people. Some of the biggest tech companies of today don't even employ more than 300 people, i.e. Facebook. But hey, this is a multi-layer situation ranging from the old industrial billionaire versus the tech billionaire who has high net worth evaluation based off his company's stock or just speculation. And at the same time, inflation comes into play, especially after the last few years. The values of NBA franchises climbing up so high that the league might have to reconsider and allow private equity to come in to buy up some of these teams. But when it comes to Glen Taylor, he definitely flipped the switch on Marc Lore and Alex Rodriguez, as it looked like they had the upper hand. But now not only he was able to secure an influx of cash, but also sharing the liability of the impending luxury tax that's going to hit the T-Wolves next offseason if they keep Karl Anthony Towns. The games that get played on the billionaire level, it's just something to be said.